welcome, and we're glad to have you here. Just to open up with, tell us, when you think about Martin Luther King, how has he impacted you and your work and your own sort of journey?
Yeah, that's an excellent way to start. I think one thing we might want to begin with is his age when he was killed. And we all know that on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, but he was only 39 years old. A lot of times we think he's an old man who traveled this long journey. And so his public ministry is from 1955 to 1968, which is about 13 years, right? So, and what that says to me as a theologian, as a person of faith, Christian faith, is that we can make a huge impact in our local communities and our global communities in a very short time if we follow our vocation. And I think that might be the most powerful and important impact he's made on me, to help me to always refocus back on what is my theological vocation, what is my faith vocation, and how that vocation is accountable to what God has called me to believe, say, preach, and do in relationship to building up the church and the community and making a difference today. It's social impact, I think, is the type of vocation, theological vocation that King left us. So it's a really vast legacy in such a very short time. Many of us now think 39 years old is just beginning life. And obviously he began a new life after he died, but on earth, it was such a short ministry. So what we can do in this temporal time on earth as far as being true to the gospel and always making a difference in people's lives, families, churches, communities, and the global. In fact, the second impact is the global. Everything King did was linked to the global. He was concerned about the issues of race, the issues of economic, and the issues of the militarism, which is the global piece. He went to Ghana and Nigeria in early 1950s, late 1950s, so he always connected Africa to Black folks in the United States. From his position as a minister, he was connected to people in Asia because he opposed the war in Vietnam. You may remember his famous Beyond Vietnam speech in April 4th, 1967, where he said, as a patriot, I have to say publicly, I opposed my government's involvement in Vietnam. And in fact, in that conflict, my own government is, quote, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, unquote. Also, he supported different countries in Latin America. I mean, he was against the violence that was used in terms of the Cuban Revolution, but he said people had to make their own decisions. He wasn't a communist, but we also have to take care of the conditions that allow people to move to communism in Cuba. So he was concerned about Cuba, and obviously he was a man of peace for the whole world. He accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, obviously, in Europe. So he was a global minister, a global visionary, way ahead of the time. And the third thing is that he saw his ministry as a ministry that developed, that evolved. And if you look at him in December 1st, 1955, his first public speech that began the Montgomery bus boycott, he speaks one way, and he keeps a lot of those basic themes, but by the time he was approaching his martyrdom, and he was very aware that it was all over, very clear that he was, you can look at Bearing the Cross by David Guerra, where he documents King's phone calls, his speeches, everything. I mean, it's a thick volume. So he knew that the death was coming, and the urgency of death and the urgency of his vocation being limited on earth, time-wise, I think pushed him more and more to take more and more risk and to bear his cross for sacrifice for the people even more. So he gets more and more sharp in terms of his critique of poverty. He talked a lot about class and wealth, not just income. There's a distinction that he made between wealth and income. Income is when we get a salary, which we all need. But he also talked about, he says, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that's 2/3 water? Literally, that's his quote. And he says, when you began to talk about the economic issue, then you began to talk about, quote, King, capitalism. So he becomes very urgency about the nature of the poor. And of course, this is based on his interpretation and his witness and his faith and his personal relation with Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior that moved his ministry. He wasn't just simply a great orator or a great civil rights leader, but he believed in the power of the Holy Spirit. He believed in the direct relation with Jesus Christ, and he believed that he was anointed by God the Father. That's the motivating factors for everything he did. And so he moved toward a class analysis, a critique of wealth, ownership, and distribution, a radical critique over race, and what he calls the white power structure. This is him using the term, not Malcolm X. He talked about that we have to not just deal with integrating and going to parks with our white brothers and sisters. We have to also talk about a redistribution of power in America on racial lines. That's a very radical movement, radical in the sense of development, not necessarily, he was always nonviolent. When I use radical, I mean a very innovative and vision, statement in such an early period in American history. And he says, we shall overcome and we shall hold hands. That's very important toward the end of his life. But we also need to, we need to own our own banks. We need to own our own companies. If you look at his speech that he gave on April 3rd, 1968, the night before he died, at a Church in God of Christ Temple Church in Memphis, he calls Jesse Jackson. He says, Jesse Jackson, because he was head of Operation Breadbasket. So the last public speech he makes, you can listen to it. It's on the web. Black people need to take their money out of white banks and put it in black banks. This is King, the night before he died. He says, we got to take our money out of white insurance companies and put them in black insurance companies. He says, I'm not calling a boycott, I'm just calling economic withdrawal. And it's a very, very, you would never think that this is, Martin Luther King, right? But again, he continued nonviolence, he continued, as a pastor and minister, he continued, his love for all humanity. It's just that I think that from 1955, December 1st, when the bus boycott began in Montgomery, to April 3rd, 1968, I think he began to have even a more sober theological and ministerial understanding for how entrenched, he called militarism, racism, and economic poverty were lodged in the structures, not just the hearts of our brothers and sisters, but the actual structures. He said, look, you may not be able to tell somebody, the Klan or White Citizen Council, not to love me, but you can pass a law to keep them from beating me on my head. Right. So he's talking about structures and systems as well as changing heart. It has to be both. Can't be either or. We really eventually, the beloved community was a long project of King, but the immediate thing was to change the structures that oppress people, particularly in race, poor people, class, and militarism. So I think he sounds a clarion call for churches even today, What do we need to do? I mean, basically, I would sum him up as someone who held together practical ministry, prophetic ministry, and priestly ministry.
So you're a former student of James Cone. And from your book, Shoes That Fit Our Feet, you've been writing about womanist theology and, of course, black theology. And I love the way you kind of curate black theology as well. Tell us more about your understanding of what black theology is from your vantage point, and why is it relevant for in our context, a seminary setting, and for academia?
I think it might be helpful to contextualize the larger picture, the creation of African Americans, their creation of black Christianity, and then their creation of theology to reflect on the Christianity created by the people.
Okay.
A lot of people don't realize that African Americans, black Americans are a recent phenomena, a recent creation. We were created in August 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia. Prior to that date, there was no such thing as black Americans. There's no such thing as African Americans until that date. So it's a very early modern creation we are as a people. And what went into that creation was the rich spiritual, religious, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, family structure, a political wisdom from West Africa, because the majority of us came from West Africa. That went into the creation of that group of folks who came in August 1619 to Jamestown, Virginia. And also what went into it was this rich encounter with Europe. Obviously rich, but still clouded under slavery. But still, there's a rich legacy from Europe that impacted the creation of African Americans. So we need to claim that, as well as critique from a theological perspective the structures of slavery. And so on August 1619, there were 17 men and 3 African women who came to Jamestown, Virginia on a Dutch man of war ship. So they didn't come on the Disney Voyager. They came on a Dutch man of war ship, which was captained by Captain Marmaduke. And Captain Marmaduke on that Dutch warship, man of warship, traded them to John Rolfe in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, as cattle, as bartering, as people without will, identity, or history. And that marks the official creation of African Americans as people. So black women are always they weren't added on from a rib. they were literally in the very beginning of African Americans in terms of African American women. So we have to always lift that up because, as we know, too often our mothers, our wives, our lovers, our sisters, our daughters, our aunts, our grandmamas, our madias and big mamas get left out. So 17 African men, 3 African women. And so over the process began to acclimate and transform into America after a period of generations. So that's how you have the people created. Then the second move is once the people are there, how do they create their own interpretation of their own experience with Jesus? How do they create a black religion, a black Christianity? So black Christianity is composed of 3 aspects created by these initial 20 black people and their descendants. One aspect is the traditions and memories from West Coast of Africa, which has a rich structure of ancestors and family structures and children and how grandparents relate to the children and rituals of eating and dress, all of that. So that's one element that goes into contemporary black religion. The second element, obviously, to me is the most fundamental, is their interpretation of the Bible as Christians. So what they did was they heard these sermons and Bible studies, teachings from the slave master or his hired preacher that says basic text was slave, obey your masters. But when they heard that story about the Exodus, they couldn't say anything. But they said, they were slaves. They were slaves, and we are slaves, you know? And when they heard the story of Mary's baby, Jesus, who was born and lived and died under empire, the Roman Empire. It's not a political statement, that's a fact. And he was whipped and scorned and spat upon, and the state apparatus opposed him, and the official preachers and clergy hated him, and only the women stayed with him. The brothers ran. You know, they began to say, oh my gosh, yeah, this is the state. Because you have to remember, slavery in the United States was not an aberration. It was the state apparatus. It wasn't just the Klan or some paramilitary white citizens council. It was the state. It was the black people are mentioned 3 times in the U.S. Constitution today. It was the state apparatus. It was the state apparatus of the Roman Empire that, killed Jesus. So they could see all these parallels. You know, black folk developed this piece about, you smile on the outside, but your head is moving in a whole nother direction, planning for something else, particularly for the children. And the third part of black religion is what I call common sense wisdom. So these fuse into the religion of those original creation of the people in August of 1619. For example, a lot of people think it's in the Bible that say, God don't like ugly. That ain't in the Bible. That's common sense folk wisdom. God sits high and looks low. That's not in the epistle to the Romans. So those are examples of common sense folk wisdom. That is what our mamas and our fathers, taught and lived all through the history of African American people. So we have the creation of the people who then create a religion called Black Christianity. And then the third piece is Black theology and women's theology. The purpose of theology is to reflect on the nature of the Christianity, to tell those people whether they're being faithful and accountable to the faith of that Christianity. So theology is an accountability discipline on 2 levels. It's a discipline in terms of the academy, the seminary, but it's also a spiritual, everyday discipline, a ritual spiritual discipline. So it's just a double take on the word discipline. It is a discipline. You're a systematic theologian, you're a discipline, trained, indeed you are, and so am I. But it's also a daily spiritual discipline. Self-examination every day about whether or not I'm being accountable to the faith that Christ has called me to be faithful to. And that includes meditation, that includes prayer, it includes how we treat our wives and our children and our husbands and our neighbor. It's a spiritual discipline as well as an academic discipline as well. So that's the whole logic of it. But the origin is how people were brought unwillingly to the so-called New World and how they used faith to sustain them over generations and how they began to think about critically the nature of their creation as God's people and also the nature of the Christianity they created so they could worship God. And hence, Black theology and women's theology come out of that trajectory.
Last summer, we had a student protest, pretty much because just black thought and diversity has been pretty much marginalized within our school. And it's been a challenge in terms of how do we integrate black thought into our curriculum in a way that is not just marginalized to a book review. So two things. I want you to speak to the context of black students in the seminary setting being formed for communities and everything else, and how black theology is such an important part of that. And I know that your own joint story and the things that you shared with me in terms of your own battles. And what would be some of the advice that you would give to our students who are here in a predominantly white school with a predominantly white Eurocentric curriculum?
So I would say start with the vision. What is the vision of the seminary? Start there. And that's going to tell us a lot about who's already here and how much others can be added to and impact that which is in the vision. It may be a situation where, not necessarily Fuller, but in other schools across the United States, that their vision, as it is now, does not include black people. It doesn't include black churches. And I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm just saying, if we're going to talk about it, let's look at the larger picture. Because, we've been fighting, domestically and globally over this issue, me and others for many generations. And even here at the beginning of the 21st century, and we're still fighting to be added. It might be that the vision itself of the schools, the divinity schools, seminaries, and theological schools, don't allow room for black people in that vision. So it's
many of them have global in their motto. But.
Right. So I would say we want to look at how they're defining theology. And the definition of theology, the official definition, it may not include black people. It may have room for black churches. It might be. Let's just deal with the reality, So I'm not saying right or wrong, but let's look at the overall structure and vision, Let's look at how they're defining their passion around their vocation. Seminaries, divinity schools are like people. They have their specific personalities. University of Chicago Divinity School has a very specific personality. Fuller has a personality, and all evangelical, everybody has a So maybe the actual nature of the theological vocation, the self-perception of their theological vocation, which stamps their personality, might not include black people or black churches. Maybe that just might be the reality. And we can go on and on. Look at the budget. To me, that's all the other blah, blah, blah. Let's just open the budget up, okay? That tells everything, where we spend our money, what percentage of it goes here, all this stuff, and hallelujah in church, my churches. Okay, let's open the budget, then we can see, right? Let's look at the board of trustees. Who's on the board of trustees? What's their biography? What's their theological biography? And I'm not saying, at this point, I'm not into attacking anybody. I'm just like, let's just get this thing done. That's my attitude now. So, I'm very prophetic. Especially, when you're younger, you want to kick tables over. I ain't never kicked no table over. But, but at this point, it's like, we've been here since August 1619. Our ancestors were colonized prior to that. And here it is, the 21st century. Okay, let's just get this done. And let's just go, let's have a black church audit. Come in here, okay? Look at the board of trustees and just see, we might find some really jewels that we've never tapped into, but let's look at them and see, what experiences they have and how they see things and what their both personal and collective agenda in the sense of, energy around how the school should move, not like ideological agenda, but so start at that level. Have some frank conversation with all the faculty. Do they really want to have it? Totally offline, whoever appropriately would relax them so they could speak honestly. Maybe it's other white brothers talking to white brothers or black sisters talking to Latino, whatever it is. And just say, are you interested or not? If they don't want it, they don't want it, okay? And I've had some experiences with my own institution and others. And, you hear things, but it seems to me if we'd have an honest conversation, if they don't want it, they don't want it. The least it would be, no, you don't want it, right? And there might be a whole bunch of people who do want it, but don't know how to structure it as well. And then we can look at the nature of theology, because these are all theological seminaries. Is black church experience, is African-American religion, is African-Americans' experience of Christianity an add-on in America? We've been in the mainstream of America. It's no way, there's no data, there's no evidence to say that we were outside the mainstream, outside the mainstream of power and legal benefits. But as far as the United States, Read Randall Robinson's book, The Debt. It shows how enslaved ancestors built the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Memorial, the Capitol. They brought up the Chesapeake River, up all those big cinder blocks. So we built that, as well as other people built. The Chinese built the railroad, but in terms of the particularity of what we're talking about, free labor from August 1619 to 1865, what is it, like 246? That's free labor. Yeah. If I had some people at my house free labor, they could fix my pipes, cook me, give me little massages, wash my clothes. I could do all kinds of things. I could sit around drinking mint julep and smoking tobacco and eating Virginia ham. All my meals were cooked and not got paid. So they gave wealth to me in terms of their labor. And then also I created extra money because I didn't have to pay them out of the money I made. So it's at least a double tax in terms of being black in America. Okay? So we're in the mainstream. You would not have the Industrial Revolution of the United States and England without the cotton from the South, which was produced by black free labor. We brought about the Western Industrial Revolution, not just for the United States and the South, for the whole the West. So we're in the mainstream of America and the development of Western culture, civilization, and economics. We're not a minority. We're a minority in terms of we're not in the power to live. But they would not have the United States. They would not have Industrial Revolution. Jazz, music, black preaching, culture, all the crazy stuff a woman has got it going on, man. All that we've added to the mainstream, people doing the DAP. Warren Buffett and all those people never did no DAP. You see them doing the DAP, like we call it the DAP. I don't know what y'all call it. And in terms of George Washington Carver, the Peanut Man, he's like 20 different patents. All the things that we have added. That's why we have got to make an argument that we're not being added to anything. They were added.
I recently was talking to a graduate from 2016, and he shared when he was here, he didn't challenge Fuller. He said, I just took my classes and got my paper. There are others, as we have been on this journey, have felt the need to, whether it's participate in student concerns meetings or to challenge some of the faculty. There are others who have taken that route. Like myself personally, my first couple of quarters, I was just a happy-go-lucky student trying to understand what this theologian was saying. But it wasn't until about my third quarter when I started hearing more stories that I felt like I needed to put some more sweat in the game. What would be your advice to a student just to stay healthy through the seminary journey?
Yeah, I think one is, again, to examine our theological vocation. Mm-hmm. And if that theological vocation it leaves out justice, if it leaves out community building, if it leaves out service, if it leaves out working with churches or religious institutions, I think it'd be very difficult to sort of corral people or guilt whip them into struggling. But if the personal vocation, theological vocation includes those things, then we are compelled by the Holy Spirit to witness to that theological vocation. I would always start there. Because those are the people who you can hold hands through the end. Because when when the cameras are going and the money is flowing, and and it's not to critique. That's just, to me, if a vocation, as we all Christian leaders, that's what usually guides us, right? So I would say maybe have some type of reflection or space for people to talk about the nature of their personal theological vocation, and some might be. Hey, I want to just do, reconciliation this way. I want to do redemption this way. I might want to do it through social justice. I might want to do it through, a women's shelter or whatever. But I think just being clear on how people individually understand their calling, theological vocation, I think that would help get clear on what roles people want to do. But I also think that community is built through struggle and through fighting, however that's termed, nonviolently, for building healthy communities. And that goes back to, our understanding of Dr. King. He told us and he taught us, and he lived by example, that one of the parts of the church, ecclesiology, for all who take systematic theology, ecclesiology, is to witness in the world with the poor and the oppressed in the streets. and the highways and byways. And so you saw him oftentimes take off his suit and tie and white shirt, his Black Baptist garb, and put on his bib overalls and go marching out with the people who are rural workers, domestics. So it's a theological faith question for each person, each student. It's understanding what the ecclesiology, what's the nature of the church, because that's who we are here for, right? And how we define church. It could be a physical building, or it could be the universal church of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. But that's part of building up the kingdom, or the kingdom is through that church, right? So that would be part of it. And then too, I think to appreciate what we already have, I think it's a blessing that to be over at the Pinnell Center. Got a little conference room, got a little director's office, got a little office for somebody else outside the director's office. But just to have that, because at least in the 60s, I don't know particularly here, but in the 60s, we didn't have that. We didn't have that, Black studies began at San Francisco State, and then Cornell and Harvard and Yale and other places around the United States, UCLA created these Black student unions and these Afro centers and African. So in Black church studies arose, Colgate Rochester was one of the pioneers with Gaylord Wilmore, and then Henry Mitchell followed him in Rochester, New York. So Black church studies offices parallel Black student unions, Afro-American centers back in the 60s. So appreciating what we already have and those limited resources that we do have to see how we can maximize that. The other thing too is to see what the collective vision is. And again, sometimes it's hard to convince people because we're all adults. We're like 18-year-old high schools. We're all mature leaders sitting around here, So I don't know if he can squeeze blood out of our turnips at this point, but to try to work with all, what we have and where we come from. In other words, how do we work with the resources, the human capital, the human resources? Somebody may be a great orator. There are a lot of Black preachers who like that. There may be some who are great behind-the-scenes organizers. There may be some who are great in fundraising. There may be some who are great working women's shelter, working with Black men in gangs. Taking an accounting of the gifts and skills that God has placed on each of us, and then how to put that together.
I have a question about the systematic exploitation of African Americans, from economic exploitation to the prison industry to the prison pipeline, from kindergarten to high school. What needs to be done for us to systematically organize, to deconstruct the many different facets of what's happening with us? And just you're mentioning, the organization of the system that the civil rights movement had in place, and how those many organizations came together to systematically deconstruct some things, as well as to fight legislatively for what needed to occur. So what do you think needs to happen now?
I think one of the greatest gifts and resources we have is the Black church, even with all of its stuff. I would be interested if we had some type of summit or some type of formation or ongoing, not just one for the cameras and all the usual suspects who are great. Those men, usually men, public people are important. But the parents and teachers, that level of ongoing meetings based out of and sponsored by the Black church to talk about a lot of these issues, because the church has the parents there. Or they have parents there who know neighbors who don't come to the church, but they do know where they are. And so for me, it has to begin from below. That is to say, from the people who are actually, giving people baths, little kids, and putting Vaseline. Y'all do Vaseline out here? The people every day, the people who are to have their voices in the structures and the discussions and the visioning and the programmatic thrusts, all of that regularly. So that I think the church could be with all the problems of the Black church, churches, and we've talked about it, others have written about it and preached on it, and I'm sure in your own life you've talked about it around women's issues, all issues, children. But the role of the Black church in public education and probably private and debates around charter, parochial, all those things, the Black church, I think, still has a role. But being a platform to allow the people who actually parent around education to speak, not just, the talking heads like myself who have degrees. And we should participate because we have certain resources and access to resources and sort of global and local networks. So it's not either or. But I think one criterion is to make sure that the everyday people who deal with education and kids are in the forefront of it. So that would be the one thing. I mean, you can never just prescribe like micromanaging, because it's such a huge issue in so many schools. You know, there's a big debate in Milwaukee, Wisconsin over black charter schools. You know, Howard Fuller was involved in that. I don't know if you know him. So there's some people who've been doing this for a while. There's been controversy in the South Side of Chicago because University of Chicago has adopted certain schools as charter schools or magnet schools. And of course, the usual suspects of public schools, private schools. Should there be black male private schools? Is that the best way? You know, there's this military. So it's about 6, 7, 8 options of education for our black kids in America. Should they go to rural schools on a farm area? You know, it's the education of our kids. The options to me are huge, not just one. And I think we want to possibly step back and think about all types of options and not let them lock us into what they're proposing to us. That's a big danger when other people define our own faith and our own community and our own families. That is, it's all over. They can go to sleep. We're still locked in the frame that they've given us. Hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, women, men fighting, children being left, you know. It's because we're locked into a framework in an energy, which I would call a satanic spirituality, that's defining us while they're asleep. You know, they're on a cruise in Disney. They're going, you know, to Hawaii. They're like taking Johnny and Jane out to, you know, go horseback riding or what y'all do down here, you know, whatever. You know, and I'm just speaking Jane, and it can be wealthy blacks too. Right. So it's not just race. So the everyday people should be involved in leadership, look at the larger framework, and open up a multiplicity of options.
My question is actually, first of all, I want to commend you for being a Pan-Africanist. Mm-hmm. That's very important, I think, as we build bridges and work together. And even here, you know, in this room, I see faces from Liberia, from Nigeria, and of course here in African-American students. I think it's something that is needed within academia, and even amongst Black people, we need to see more of that building together. And my question one is, how did you come about being a Pan-Africanist? I've been here in the US, I've been going to school here in the US for the past over 10 years. And I do not see much of that amongst, especially African-American professors. So how did you get there? And my second question is, how would you encourage us? What sort of things would you suggest for Black students to come together? When I mean Black, I mean African Americans, diasporians, and I'm also talking about continental Africans coming together and building together so that we can fight, in my view, white supremacy, even within Theological Seminary.
Question? It goes back to how we believe and witness to the nature of the faith. To me, that undergirds everything, you know? That is it. So if we do believe that Jesus Christ is the life of the world, then we are in relationship and hold hands with the world. But we also understand that the revelation of Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit comes through culture. There's no way we can appreciate Jesus Christ if it's not linked to culture. Because the beauty of Christianity is it takes what it is and says, I'm going to use what you have, that stuff, and I'm going to reveal the good news through what you already have. You don't have to be researching and climbing mountains and looking at that's the beauty, the accessibility of Christianity. So culture is very important for me. And there is something unique and beautiful and particular about African, continental African, and African diasporan culture. You know, I wouldn't be who I am, because if I didn't embrace and study and live out and think back the African part of who I am, and through slavery and all of that. So part of it begins initially, I think, the fundamental issue is what's the nature of the faith? You know, we can't separate that. And then the faith, to me, comes through culture, to love one's culture. The other thing is that, for me, I cannot love deeply other people. I can love them until I love myself. So I'm still under sin in terms of slavery, but gospel joy-wise, I'm like this whether I'm in Beijing or I'm in Harare or I'm in, up in Davos. I shouldn't tell you where I go. London. I'm just that because, that's just who I am. There's nothing I can do about it, so just may as well embrace it. And that comes a lot from African-American culture. So understanding the gospel, appreciating culture, and to live in that which we are, how we've been created. And we've been created black. We've been created as African people, right? The other thing, I think Dr. Pinnell Center has done a lot. There was an open conversation last fall, I think, between African and African-American students. 2016. So that's, to me, I have never heard of that. I don't know anything, 370 million people in America, what do I know? But I have never heard that dialogue ever taken back. Constructive dialogue. I've been part on both sides, and Caribbean side, why y'all, all that. But it's a structured conversation. I think that is a great model, paradigm that could be exported across the United States. Have people come like that. The Pinnell Center is planning to take students from Fuller, particularly African-American students, but others, to Ghana. It's a very important model that, as I understand, includes both recreation, but also education, both worship, exposure, history. I understand they're going to go to the slave castles, which is, I think, every black American should go to the slave castles off of Ghana and bring a lot of Kleenex, the weeping and wailing when you first go there. And and I won't give a spoiler alert, but when you go down there from the coast in that cave, and and then you see the ocean, and that's the last thing they see.
We have a lot of institutions, a seminary. I'm concerned about seminaries in the United States. A lot of the major ones are white. So my question to you is, what should be the expectation of black students who enter a white seminary?
Wow, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's a big one. That's what the good doctor said here. Pain, right? Trials and tribulations. That's, if you heard the sermon, part of it was fortification through temptation. Bearing your cross. I mean, literally, that's part of the Christian message. Unfortunately, there's evil in the world. So that's important to be prepared for that. But I think, again, being clear on why come to seminary. Some people come to get a credential so they can get a bigger church or to do prison ministry or chaplaincy in the military. I mean, all that's good. But it seems to me this is such a precious time where people can read and go to classes and meet people from, are the Armenian sisters here? I mean, you've got Armenian sisters, you've got two women from biological sisters from Armenia. I've never heard, and you got like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different countries from Africa. You got all African Americans from Virginia to Santa Barbara just all here, So, being clear on why we want to come, looking at all the different possibilities that are here, but also being sober about the pain, and I think it's structural, cultural, and spiritual. And again, I'm not critiquing, but that's just my observation of being on the journey. The other thing, too, is I would hope that folks come, but also keep connection to the community outside of the school, because that's very important. Because for a lot of us, maybe not all, but I think for a lot of us, it was our connections with our families and communities that helped us get clear on our calling and helped us come to these schools. Financially, in a lot of cases, either through the church or through someone in our family. So I think that's important too. And I would say, a lot of prayer and a lot of resistance in these seminaries. And again, I'm not talking about ideological left, right. I think that's just the reality. I'm talking about reality now. Let's just look at the reality, and we can talk about how we interpret it as theological left, right, or center. But, I think that's just part of what we're going through, part of being in America, all those things. So just some initial thoughts.
My question has to do with the issue of categorization. And I know there are different views on this, and I would just like to hear your perspective. The category of African American or Black American, do you think it's an effective framework for dealing with issues of division and history? And I asked that question even with the background of Liberia. If you know a little bit history about Liberia, a lot of free slaves were repatriated to Liberia after slavery by the ACS, which is how Liberia became a country. And to now, we still have the issue of native and Congo, as in those who came as free slaves and those who were Liberian. Mm-hmm. And so that challenge of classifying people like that, I mean, that construct, I don't know what's your thought on it. How helpful is it? How constructive it is for dealing with issues of diversity, so to speak?
Part of the reality is that we are given these when we're born by the societies we live in. So on the one hand, we got to deal with them, these ideas of Black Americans or African Americans, but on the other hand, too, I think we are sober enough to realize that they are constructed, the so-called social, the human beings, particularly man, I do mean man, created these categories. Categories of race were done during the European Enlightenment and during the century called the race of man, which was the 19th century. Blumenthal, who was a big statue at the University of Chicago. So on the one hand, realizing this is what reality is, but also knowing that these are social constructs. And if they're social constructs, that means that God didn't create them. Mm-hmm. And therefore, man, and it's usually man, when you look at the archives, there weren't any women there, at least they weren't recorded. And if man created them, then all of us can recreate them. So the reality, looking at the reality, and then understand that they're social constructs. There's got to be some way to classify people because there's certain markers, whether it's our physiognomy or something, or history or tradition or language, that marks us. That's part of the modern world, right? But I think it can be a hindrance when when it moves from just being the surface acknowledgement to the fundamental acknowledgement or definition of the person. To me, that's the big problem. For example, we've been to Latin America and, travel, and so we use the words like African American, and the Afro-Brazilian says, we're African American, and the Black Nicaraguan said, we're African Americans. And I was like, wow, I have imbibed the Kool-Aid of U.S. imperialism, linguistic imperialism. I'm fighting for the church and fighting for the people. So being open to people, being open to allies, being open to people who might want to hold hands and break bread all over, and hearing their voices and being open to that, I think that'll help us get out of a lot of these categories as well. The one locally in Liberia, we'd have to have an offline conversation. That's a very complex one, very complex.
Okay, Mark, you have a question?
My question, I'm still kind of formulating it, is based on my brothers, Black brothers I grew up with, lawyers, professionals now, who would say that the movement for equal rights for gays is equal to the civil rights movement and equal rights for people of color. What would you have to speak to that, as well as what would, and I don't, I guess that's your opinion, right? So I know you're not the spokesman for, Black liberation theology, but I would love to hear your perspective of what you think maybe Cone would have said, and maybe wouldn't have been concerned, but what would Black liberation theology have to say about that kind of issue in society right now, as well as that first question about how are these movements similar, how are they different?
Right. I think we would want to avoid accepting the paradigm that the larger culture has imposed. That is, who's most oppressed? See, that once we get locked in are Asian Americans more oppressed than Black Americans, or Latino, are they, who came here first and who did the most, who built the country, I try to avoid that. So our sexual orientation or primary issue is the race, the primary issue. I began to say that we are all created by God. We can debate how we're created by God and what impacted the original creation of God. So I'm leaving room for all sides. So I'm not necessarily taking a position now. So framework-wise, I try to avoid the framework, how they're defining the question, the larger society, particularly the media and others, how they structure the way we talk about it. So are their civil rights the same as Black? More important was that's the whole thing. Who's Black? Even in the '60s in the South, at least I'm from the South, was always which Black person was more Black than the other. It's like totally correct, whack, right? So avoid that. And then the other thing is to say that God has created all that there is. And God is sovereign over all that there is, and has offered grace and resources and opportunities for everybody. Now, that seems to be a very naive response, but so get out of the locked-in discourse, go to the God question, and then be aware and sober, but it's a little more nuanced than that, because we haven't even talked about, is that a natural creation? So that's a whole nother debate, right? But at least those three moves to me would help, get out of the locked-in perspective of how to deal with the question of language, what from the God perspective, and then realize that it's the specifics of who's full humanity. It's a very touchy, long-term debate, right? So anyway, that's what I would say.
What's
that
the
way.
third move?
But just that, we've talked about these beautiful frameworks, get out of the linguistic structure, go to the God question, hallelujah. But then on the ground, there's a lot of debate and nuance and contention about these issues, right? Just to be sober, that's a long-term, have a sober, pragmatic perspective that it's a long, intergenerational. It is debate, long time.
Tamisha.
Two questions, or twofold questions. One, what is the role of the academic in engaging in the traditional discipline, or the top tier discipline of doing theology? And what advice would you give to future academics in the room so that they won't either negate or usurp the role of people who are on the ground, the pastors, the people who are doing the activist work, the artists, the women in the church? So what is the role of the academic? And how can academics maintain the truth and hold the beauty of where theology is actually birthed for Black and women's theology?
I think part of it comes from the mission of the institution. For example, a lot of divinity schools, like the University of Chicago, which are housed in universities, our mission is linked to the larger university. But I also do DMin stuff, and I do lectures in churches all the time, from the Provo, first Black professional to speak the Church of Latter-day Saints in Provo since the 12 elders decided in 1978 that Black people were not animals. So, but it took them a while. I was the first one. So I'm open. So I do not just the Divinity School of Chicago, but I see how. So if the mission of Fuller and other great schools like Fuller is to serve the church explicitly all the way down, then I would probably think that maybe one of the criterion for hiring faculty is that they're either pastoring churches or working with churches, however level, education, Bible study, field trips, like that. So it'd be structured part of the discussion of what faculty. So the academic is already systemically and structurally linked to the church, as an academic. But I do think, you use the word academic, so I think that we also have to appreciate that, Paul says some are called to preach and some are called to teach. So we have to, particularly in the Black church tradition in the United States, I can go lecture and there's, Hopkins written up, but that on Saturday, because I often do it. Then on Sunday, I rarely don't preach anymore because I want to do the teaching piece. And then I preach, hey, he brought the fire. I brought the fire on Saturday, right? So, so I think we have to appreciate that academic work structurally into the church, but also the gift, the calling, the vocation that Paul mentions is that some are called to teach. It's a calling from God. It's a ministry. And so I think that would also help this question of enhancing the pipeline and glorifying the pipeline to move people into the academy and professors like that. The other thing is, again, if the theology is that, if the theology is from below, that is to say, Jesus came for those who didn't have a voice, those who suffered, hemorrhaging or on their periods, wherever that woman was, who touched the hem of his garment, or whether it's the guy who was, who needed to be healed and brought down through the roof, or when he came to the party and turned the water into wine. That's what we call him. We knew he was a brother. Okay, y'all, the Baptists would have been rolling. So that's right, the Pentecostals don't drink. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that went right over my head.
I thought I was in my home Baptist. They would have been, Black preachers would have been rolling on the Baptists. Okay. Or those who need to be nourished by milk and honey, if the theology and the faith is understood as being linked to people, then wherever we go, whether they're academicians or full-time pastors or we get joy out of those people. And we get joy out of other people too, but if the theology is that, then that's what gives us joy, and we'll gravitate to, to Jesus' joy. So again, to me, a lot of it's theological, the nature of our faith, the nature of our vocation, and it has to be, as we say, it has to be an everyday discipline.
I want to know about the separate thoughts concerning oppression, because there is internalized oppression that kind of, is interwoven in conversations of freedom and all of that. And so what I want to know is, how do you reconcile within, Latino and Black cultures? I'm an LAUSD teacher that was striking all last week. It was interesting to see that my Latino sisters and brothers were saying, well, this is really about Latino students. And my African American brothers and sisters saying, well, this is about Black students. We were both at the bottom because of the oppression that, seems to push down on all of us. So how do you reconcile internalized oppression within Black and brown spaces, within the church, and then how do we then reconcile that so that we can work together ecclesiastically?
There are some models right here on the West Coast. There's Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland, California. J. Alfred Smith Sr. is emeritus, and his son is just J. Alfred. So they actually opened up the church on Sunday in the afternoon when there was a Latino pastor, evangelical, who didn't have a place to lay his head, and he began his congregation out of that. They've also worked with, in partnership with Latino, communities, Christian, non-Christian, but just work with them in solidarity. J. Alfred Smith Sr., who was a former pastor for 50 years, he learned Spanish. So part of it is that we have to see ourselves in the other. If we call ourselves, doing ministry, if we're Christian leaders or we're doing pastoral work. And the challenge oftentimes for me is to put the theological mirror in front of me, to see ourselves in the other, to reach out as part of our witness as ministry to the other, those who are different from us, at least on the surface, and also to put the theological mirror in front of myself to self-examination. And then I'm not sure what else, but it's just maybe we have to have a joint Bible study between the two. Because it's very clear in the history of the United States that there's certain people who have a lot of power in the history of the United States, have used folks at the bottom to divide and conquer. It's just so clear. And California has been the canary in the mine. They've done a lot. In the 1849 with the Chinese who came over, also the Japanese Hawaiian who did sugar in Hawaii when they came over. Let alone how the Irish were called the N-word in Europe, then they became calling other people the N-word. So, but a lot of people in the labor movement, so there's such a rich, and California's been, on the forefront of that historically, is how to deal with all of that stuff. And it's just kind of interesting, if not sad, as someone just coming here, that a place that has such a rich history of dealing with it is still maybe, and I don't want to critique the local situation, might be fall into the same trap that they've been perpetuating. But California has been, United States is the only country in the world where every other country in the world have citizens here. So it causes deep friction, right? From Caribbeans and Black Americans in Brooklyn, where there's like Caribbean brothers, well, we don't want those men, I almost said something, the Black men, with our daughters. I would live there, I was like, we're Black, right off of Pan-Africanism. And then you have certain folk in the United States that don't like Africans. African, I ain't no African. I'm a Christian, okay. And let alone Black and brown. And then, oh my goodness, the Asian and China's coming, oh my God. And that's coming through a wall from Latin America or whatever. But there are examples and models here, right, in California. And in fact, as I was saying, California is a state that has most of the world's countries here. So it could be a burden or it could be a joy, to celebrate. This is the front edge of what the world should look like that God created here in California, That choir, I'm telling you, it's September got it on. She's, I tell you, got the little short age girl. She's got talking about Negro spirituals and people waving in the hands like. You're from like Fiji?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so it's a big fact.
Is it no, but I'm saying that's,
It's a beautiful
that
thing.
tells you about how beautiful African American culture
That's true.
has a universal message. That is the walking manifestation, that choir. And so I'm like, man.
Yeah, it depends on the chapel.
Chapel.
Yeah. 'Cause
Okay, well, that group-
it's very multicultural, but for MLK we went all gospel.
Okay, well, let's hang right there, okay? Let's just park it right there.
For the last 11 years, coming out of a black church and being placed in a predominantly white church, but considered multicultural, but still white in terms of culture, multi-ethnic, but white in terms of culture. So what advice would you give a pastor who's taking black theology, black theological thought into white spaces? The bulk of my audience is white, multicultural, but more conservative, evangelical. And so I'm bringing that black theology or black theological thought to that space. And there's that pushback, and there's friction, and there's what are you talking about, and there's leaving the church, and there's blasting me on Facebook and stuff. So how do you effectively deal with that and taking that to those spaces?
Wow, that is a heavy one. Yeah. To me, there are two probably misconceptions, at least two probably, on black theology. That is, well, people understand that black theology was created primarily initially by pastors who weren't professors, and most people didn't have PhDs. So as I enter so-called white spaces, whatever, it's just that, that's the origin of it, right? Like, people can have distortions about a Western church tradition, but when you go back to the origin, they argue about the origins. You take churches, so it's the same method. The origin is here, and there's always turns and twists in the legacy of any people. But it began not primarily, it's for pastors and church workers in denominations. The second thing is black liberation theology came out of the Bible. Marxism was used a great deal in the origin of Latin American liberation theology and other places. And, hey, if that's what God has, I have my own view. But the black liberation theology here was initiated from the black church, and they arose out of the biblical witness in our preaching. So I don't know if that's helpful, but when I talk about it, I just talk about how it arose. But there is a fact that in the rise and the creation of black people, Christianity from the black experience and black theology and women's theology, that others attacked it. See, black theology, and when we talk about race, not that we wake up and say, oh, God, I'm going to take out some white people this morning. People get up and take a shower, deal with their kids and their wives, or maybe it's like everybody else. Then people get attacked. Then you got to respond. That's the issue. No human being gets up and says, I'm going to attack another. People don't get up angry against another group of people. But when you attack, you respond. The prophetic comes out. I think for helps me is to talk more about the origin of it, which is the pastors, and also the biblical basis for it, and then to speak directly to why is there a prophetic edge to black liberation theology and a lot of black preaching and certain parts of women's theology. People don't wake up angry. What makes the prophetic edge so important is that it's the absurdity, it's the existential absurdity of being black in America. I've had a black student who, when he wants to get a loan for his church, he gets over the phone and he says, I use my white professional English. And she said there was a manager who happened to be a white sister, but she said, well, we don't tell all the black customers this. And not every white person or every black person either. That's the other thing, don't have it. But it's just these little, so when you hear about these little absurdities, they just wipe you out, right? Even if 99.9% are true, whether they're black, white, red, or yellow, it's just these little things, It's like, why, Lord? I mean, you don't even know me. I mean, what have I done to you that you don't want? So I think that, being direct and open and loving in conversation and fellowship with why the prophetic edge is there. So I think it's important not to avoid the prophetic, but to try to be loving. And love can have an edge sometime. Even Dr. King had an edge in his love. It was tough love. But it doesn't have to be all 24/7, but it seems to me there is a moment and a need for for an explanation of why the prophetic is there. It's to me, others, Cornel West, Dyson, other people, Katie Cannon, but to speak about this, but it's like an existential absurdity. It really is, it's absurd. If somebody doesn't know me and they call me a name, somebody doesn't know me, they deny me a resource. They don't know me. Why? Because that's the absurdity. I think it's Satan, spirituality as well. Not the person, but the culture.
We look forward to a day when we can just say it's a theologian.
It's a
Theologian, as opposed to a black theologian or a white theologian. Because is it the blackness or is it the Spirit of God that we're looking at when someone writes theology?
yeah.
Everybody heard that question? This is like one of the jugular vein. I have to keep it short. Just one. The history of European and Euro-American history have always had adjectives in front of their theology. So we just want to get that. Now you're bulling my alley. Since the brothers ran away after Jesus and the sisters came and said, then the church begins. Every European theology, every European church, every white American church since 1607, Jamestown, arrival for Europeans, and 1620, the Pilgrims year, every church in Europe and the United States have adjective in front of it, including Moltmann's theology. So why do we have a question about when black and women, we got to drop our adjectives? But no, this is very important. There is no European theology or white American theology that does not have an adjective in front of it. There's no universal European. They have fought wars in Europe to keep their adjectives. So this is not just brother, but that's why it's like when we get in power, we stop giving tenure. Wait a minute, I fought to get tenure. The AAR had a proposal to abolish tenure. It just so happened that's when all the people of color and women came in. So I get really excited about it. So what we're doing is new. It's not new. It's mainstream tradition to have an adjective in front of your theology. Karl Barth, dialectical theology. Paul Tillich, the method of correlation theology. I can go on, and Augustine, who was a brother, Augustinian theology, Lutheran theology. I get it. He's right on it. But this is part of the jugular vein. Well, that's why we add you to the curriculum because we're doing universal theology. No, you're not.
Come on, sir.
You're doing Barthian theology. I mean, you go on, man. I need to teach a course on that.
You're preaching now.
Because that's how they lock us in. They lock us in with their language. Once we don't have to do it here, but we can do it. Since the church fathers, since the 12 disciples, since the women's disciples, up until political theology is huge now in the AR, Evangelical theology. So it's like, why now we got to drop black and womanist, And it's not that, we're joking because we've got some similar backgrounds. But that's important to recognize that, in fact, this is part of church tradition, part of mainstream church tradition from Europe, from Northeast Africa, where Jesus was born and people were created, until today. It's part of mainstream, African theology.
Remember the
answer? Is that tribal theology?
Yeah.
What do you mean tribal theology? Come on, man. Don't get me started. I'm getting short, but I think that is part of the jugular vein. If you can get that, then you're not being added on. You're in the mainstream.
All right, Dia, you got the last question.
As we are leading into a new direction for Fuller, should the focus be on emphasizing Black theology, women's theology, Latino theology, and all of these different sections, or should we look for opportunities to create a sort of new identity in which you have a merging of the cultures? I don't even know if that's feasible or possible because we are in a sort of white normative structure, but because we're in this particular time now where we're conscious of it and we're trying to steer in a new direction, what's possible now? Because we're in a very particular place right now, and I feel like we have a chance to do something fresh and new, but which way to go about it?
Yeah, I think that there's the ideal beloved community that King and Rosa Parks and Fannie Lou Hamer and all those people died for. And then there's the reality that at this point in human history, for whatever reasons, people of faith want to have space to celebrate the particularity of their cultures. So I think there's always, the eschatological, that is the reality that God, Jesus the Trinity has prepared for us. And the Pauline already and the not yet. So the not yet is the eschatological, but the already is what is here. And what is here is, I think, for various reasons we talked about, and particularly black people we're talking about here, that's the main, a lot of black people, 47 million. There are a lot of African-American Christians who feel important to have spaces to enjoy and celebrate the relationship between their faith and their culture. And finally, just this, people, even black churches, but the biggest institution of black power in the United States is the black church. Don't let that all that it is. In fact, Dr. King created Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So in 1950, they created it like 1956, but in 1957, so like in 1959 or 60, the brothers, because they wouldn't let any women be in the leadership, and they said, Doc, we talk about integration and we should overcome, but we ain't got no white people in our leadership. There's no black pastor will ever surrender the black power to black church. So let's just start reality, okay? So that might be part of the reason we can't get there. And the same thing for other people. And I say it jokingly, but to me, I think it's really more in the positive that I think for whether it's pain or theology or history, that a lot of black Christians want to have space for celebration as we move toward the eschatological not yet that Paul talks about.
Well, this is a part of the MLK week and the MLK lectures that the Pinnell Center has host. We look forward to having further conversations. Dr. Hopkins, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.